Hello and welcome back to biology. Today we want to talk about competition. And competition is really important because obviously there are more offspring that are born than can survive, and it is competition that ensures that those that are fit enough to survive will, and those that aren't don't. And there are two main types of of competition. There's intraspecific and interspecific, and we're going to talk about both of these. But we're going to start with intraspecific. Intra means within the same species. Inter means among different species. Now, animals will compete for resources, whether it's intra or interspecific. Aggressive behavior will help to secure resources. Now, within the same species, dominance hierarchies really help manage those aggressive interactions, and then territories will help manage and contain resources. Now we're going to start with aggressive behavior. So aggressive displays allow competitors to really figure out what they're up against, right? And so what's great about this is you can actually have a winner without having any sort of injury. I mean, the idea is that you want to defend your territory, but if you get injured, you become a weaker competitor, and now you will lose everything that you had before. So posturing turns out to be really important, and many animals are equipped with things that will let you know exactly what you're dealing with right up front. Like here's a male baboon. You can see these huge fangs, right? These would do a serious amount of damage, but in fact, they don't spend a lot of time having damage done because they are actually showing these off and saying, I will use them, and then they don't have to. Wolves are the same way, right? You can see this is a hugely aggressive display. This animal is dominant over this animal. You can see that with the head down, the ears forward, right? And I would imagine that this animal's mouth is closed. You can't see it because of the snow, but it probably is, right? This is direct eye contact, big teeth, right? Very aggressive. And then these are crazy. These are called fringe heads. And actually they're called sarcastic fringe heads, but that's not important. They are showing each other these giant, flaps that are on either side of their head, but also highlighted in there are these really wicked looking teeth here. And so you have the one who's like, I am the toothiest, is going to be the winner. Okay. Now, there is a time when posturing really does not stay just viewing, okay? Many animals have what's called ritualized combat, and this is kind of a testing of the weapons and strength. You can get hurt. It's still kind of part of posturing. It's non-lethal typically, but that doesn't mean there's no injuries. And here's a good example. Fiddler crabs, they'll grab on to their claws here, and they'll wrestle until one of the claws pops off. Now, the nice thing is they can grow those back. Hopefully, though, right, that can happen. Hopefully, one of the crabs will figure out that the other one is stronger than he is, and they'll let go, right? And so you don't ever get to the claw pulling off stage. And here are some grouses, sage grouses, who are showing their big air sacs they have in their neck. They've got the big feathers. They're running at each other. They don't ever, and there's a real choreographed nature to these dances, and whoever does it the best is the winner. Now, these kind of ritualized combat, this posturing, all of this, it will lead to, in herd animals, something called a dominance hierarchy. And a dominance hierarchy is where you have ranks, and your rank will determine your access to resources. Alphas get the most resources. Those lowest on the totem pole do not, right? It is an initial bout of aggression that is going to determine your status. And the great thing about that is it will actually minimize subsequent encounters because you already have an established dominant individual. This one has made it very clear that it is the biggest, it is the smartest, whatever, okay? And so the challenge has to come from a male who is feeling particularly confident about himself. And they do get challenged, and sometimes they win, and as they get older or sick or whatever, they don't. Male bighorn sheep actually are really interesting because they will butt heads. They'll slam these plates into each other. But you can see these giant horns really let competitors know that he is the big boy on the block. These are females, by the way. And then chimpanzees, their competition and dominance hierarchy is very complex. Once the alpha is established, that is really the way it goes. And then you have a series of beta males who will support him once they feel like he is not doing a good job, I suppose. Or there's another chimp that is stronger, would make a better alpha. They actually form political alliances to oust the old alpha, and so the beta males will help install a new alpha. It's very much like us. It's very rooted in deception. It's rooted in the idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. These alliances often fall apart after the new alpha is put into place. It gets really, really complicated. It's very interesting, very much like us. Now, the other thing that you can do is territory. Have a territory. Because if you have the territory, you don't have to worry about sharing resources with anyone else. It's yours. You're in it. The mates, the food, the shelters, that's all it, right? Now, again, initial aggression is going to define the territory, and that will lessen any subsequent aggression. It doesn't mean you're never going to get challenged, but it's going to be established that it's going to be a problem if you want to take over someone else's territory. Okay, and here are sticklebacks. We'll come back to them later on because they're very interesting. And then here are some acorn woodpeckers, and they actually live in these really cool communal groups, and they drill holes into logs and then they shove acorns in them because it's their acorn storage. It's like their pantry. All right, now territorial defense. Competition for mates can actually be based on those territories, and so males will advertise their territories to females. A lot of times females will be picking males because they're actually watching these aggressive interactions, right? And so they will decide from that interaction which of the two is the winner. But in species that set up territories, the female actually will look for the best territory because it's obvious that the best male has the best territory because he's the one that was able to defend it. All of these things will increase the survival of her offspring. So how would you advertise occupancy in your territory? Well, if you are a big animal, you're going to have a really big territory, and you're going to have to figure out some way to mark your boundaries, and that's where chemicals come in handy, right? All sorts of animals urinate or leave scent markers all around their territory. If you have a cat, when your cat rubs all over you, they're actually marking you with a scent. You've become part of their territory. Animals that will urinate right places, but also they'll call, right? They'll actually make vocalizations that will say, this is my territory. Rabbits and hamsters are some of the pheromone releasers. Lots of animals are. Sea lion, elks, crickets, and seaside sparrows are the ones we're going to talk about for vocalization. And the sea lion makes this really elephant-like call that is really loud, and you can see all of these female sea lions are here. They think he is like the stuff. He is awesome. He's got it together. This is an elk, and they make this really interesting bugling noise. It's really loud. It's called trumpeting because that's what it kind of sounds like, and you can see that he's doing it here. And then the seaside sparrow has a beautiful song. Songbirds are announcing their territories and advertising for mates, both together when they're doing that. And so birds are really, really vocal about their territory. And crickets, you've heard them, right? That's what they're doing. They're saying, ooh, this is my territory. Now, there's also interspecific competition. And this is when two species that use the same resource will compete with each other, like lions and hyenas. Now, the catch about this is that no two organisms can actually occupy the same niche, which means they can't be using the same resources in the same way at the same time. If they are, they're in competition with each other, and there will be some sort of aggressive or passive-aggressive interaction. And lions and hyenas actually hate each other, right? There are all sorts of videos about lions and hyenas really antagonizing each other. You can see the aggression between them. They really do not enjoy each other's company at all. Okay, now, what is a niche, right? Because I said there can be only one in a niche. So an ecological niche is the sum total of an organism or species, depending on if you're talking, what you're talking about, It's the way they use their abiotic resources, and it's how they interact with other organisms, the biotic component. Now, there are really two kinds of niches. You have a fundamental niche, and that's ideally what you'd be doing, right? The realized niche is what you're actually using. Okay, now, two species will often try and occupy the same niche. When that happens, according to the principle of competitive exclusion, which is pretty accurate, one species will outcompete the other. And so there are only a couple of options when that happens. So here you have some interspecific competition. They'll end up specializing in one direction or the other, and so you can have the two species end up living side by side. In some cases, one species actually, if you have really heavy competition, one species will either migrate and leave, or it will die out, right, go extinct. And then in some cases, when you have one species that becomes a specialist, where the other species remains a generalist, they can exist within the niche but occupy a slightly different niche, and that minimizes competition. And here's just an example. You have two different types of paramecium. Here's one, right, grown separately. Here's the other one grown separately. But when you put them together, you can see that paramecium caudatum actually dies right out, and Aurelia grows really well and is very successful. That means that this is the stronger competitor. So, here's your first question. Certain night-active moths and day-active birds are specialized nectar feeders. How do these species coexist if they're using the same resource for food? There's enough nectar to supply both the birds and the moths. Eventually, the niche breadth will increase, minimizing competition. Both will migrate to a new area since they both eat nectar, or they don't compete since they feed at different times. Well, there's never going to be enough nectar, right? There's always going to be some limit to what is available. Niches are not going to grow in that way. Number two doesn't even make any sense, right? They could both migrate to an area, but really, typically only one leaves. One of them wins, one of them is booted out. But night-active moths, day-active birds, it means that they are not feeding at the same time. This means there's no competition, and that is called resource partitioning. Resource partitioning will tend to lead to a high degree of what in species? Well, as we've been talking about, right, in order to really exploit a resource, you probably want to be really good at it. If you are having heavy competition, you need to be really good at it. You need to be a specialist. So when you start seeing resource partitioning, minimizing competition, you start seeing specialists develop that are experts at exploiting a single type of resource. Okay? And that brings us to the Great War of the Squirrels. Cutie, our squirrel, little gray squirrel, adorable. We like them. Well, some of you don't, but most people think squirrels are okay. That is a cute little red squirrel, right? The gray American squirrel, the British red squirrel. The gray American squirrel is a little bit bigger. It has a very varied diet. The red squirrel's cute and small and, pretty much eats seeds. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, gray squirrels were introduced as an exotic, right, by some members of the aristocracy on their property so they could have something fancy, because if you don't live here, gray squirrels are fancy. Turns out that gray squirrels, with their larger size, their ability to exploit lots of different resources, and their higher reproductive rate, have totally outcompeted the red squirrel. Now, I just said that resource partitioning leads to specialization, but here's the deal. Competition doesn't always lead to resource partitioning. Sometimes it just leads to extinction. And so currently, this is 2010, red squirrels had been pushed to the north, gray squirrels have taken over completely, and they are moving farther north. In a very short period of time, it's highly likely that the red squirrel will be extinct in the wild because the gray squirrels are so much better at it. And in some cases, a generalist can outcompete a specialist when there are other factors involved, because the generalist can get nutrition from all sorts of sources. But also reproductive rate matters. Gray squirrels reproduce a whole lot faster than red squirrels, so they just make more babies. Okay, now competition is based on density, right? And density is all about those more babies we were talking about. Why would competition be a density-dependent factor? Well, let's think about it. There are limited resources, and those limited resources are going to restrict population growth. And the maximum number of individuals that you can have in any ecosystem is called the carrying capacity. Now, what would be an effective strategy to reduce intraspecific competition? Different ecological niches for juveniles and adults, eating prey before they are, quote, ripe for another species, rapid reproduction, establishing territory. None of these would limit intraspecific competition. Well, one of these will, so 5 is right out. We know that establishing territories doesn't actually reduce competition, it is a form of competition. Rapid reproduction would increase the number of individuals. That is going to increase competition. Eating prey before another species can get to it is a great strategy to reduce interspecific competition, not intraspecific competition. But there are lots of organisms that actually have what are called complex lifestyles, and butterflies and frogs are really good examples. The larva of the butterfly is the caterpillar, and it eats different things than the adult butterfly does. The larva of a frog is a tadpole. It's aquatic. It eats different things than the adult frog does. And so you've actually eliminated competition. And so you can have a higher population, less competition. It works quite well. So that complex lifestyle is a really good way to do that. So 1 is the answer. So competition, density dependent. Food is density dependent. It's a limiting factor. More individuals, less food for each individual. Predators are density dependent, right? Because the more prey there are, the more predators there can be. But the more predators there can be, the more prey that gets eaten. Yeah? And so eventually there is less prey than there are predators. So before those predators starve, right, because the population's decreased, there's a huge risk to the prey. So that could go up or down. Parasites, more individuals mean more, those are heartworms, by the way. More individuals mean more transmissible opportunities for parasites and pathogens. Okay, and those pathogens, we're talking about disease. This happens to be the respiratory fungus that is killing lots of species of bats right now, and it could be really problematic in those ecosystems. Okay, now, density-independent factors, these are things mostly abiotic, that affect a population regardless of that size of that population. It doesn't matter. They're going to kill individuals, they're going to not kill individuals, it doesn't matter how many there are. Natural hazards, really, really good example of this. This is that volcano in Iceland that erupted and shut down air traffic a couple of years ago. Floods, right, that pretty much self-explanatory. On the other end of it, droughts, pretty much self-explanatory. Climate change is changing precipitation patterns, it's changing temperatures, so it's changing when prey is available, and that is going to be an issue, an adaptation. And pesticides, we actually kill things, right? And it doesn't matter what size the population is, they're poisons. They'll kill 1, they'll kill 100, it doesn't matter, right? So really what we're talking about is population regulation. Density-dependent and density-independent factors both play a role in population size. Density-dependent factors are going to increase pressures as the populations get bigger, whereas the density-independent factors are going to decrease population size in terms of how extreme the event is and how resilient the organisms are, right? But both of these things can actually make changes in the genetic makeup of a population, which is what we're going to be talking about in the coming days. So here's your last question. You've got a keystone predator, right? This Pisaster sea star. And the sea star preys on mussels who might otherwise outcompete some other species that live in their marine intertidal community. So keystone predators are going to reduce the occurrence of competitive exclusion of weak competitors, right? So it means that they are going to take pressure off of weak competitors. So how would this promote biodiversity, right? So are you going to have an increase in competition by increasing populations of the superior competitors? Are you going to increase competition by decreasing the superior competitors? Do you reduce competition by increasing the populations of superior competitors? Or do you reduce competition by decreasing the populations of superior competitors? Well, here's the thing. Superior competitors outcompete weak competitors. So think about that. It just says that we're going to reduce competition, right? And so obviously 1 and 2 are right out. But here's the thing. Would you reduce competition by increasing the superior competitors? No, you would need to decrease the superior competitors. So what this means is that the sea star eats superior competitors, keeping that population down, allowing for the weaker competitors to actually thrive. Okay, that is it for competition. If you have any questions, please ask me in class, and I will see you next time. Thanks for listening.